I'm Morgan Boyle, Manager of Adult Cultural Programming at the New York Public Library, and I'm excited to welcome you all to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library and to this beautiful space overlooking Fifth Avenue. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome you to World Poetry Salon with our partners at Limelight Poetry. Tonight's event features poet Luljeta Lleshanaku, musician Nava Dunkelman, and moderator Patricio Ferrari. Now I'm going to turn it over to Wang Yin from Limelight. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the program.
Thank you, Morgan. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Wang Yin, poet and founder of Limelight Poetry. My thanks to my friend Jeffrey Young, who introduced me to Luljeta Lleshanaku and told me she lives in New York. We are lucky to have such a remarkable poet with us. He can write lines like a spring kills solitude with its solitude. He truly deserves that phrase. Lleshanaku is the real thing, as inaccessible as an oasis behind a mountain on the moon. These are Elliot Weinberg, not mine, and he's here with us tonight. Music is the sister of poetry. Here, Nava, Dunkelman with Luljeta, you will see how amazing she is. And welcome to our dear Patricio Ferrari. Thank you to the NYPL team, Brian, Erica, Robert, and Morgan. Thank you. And thank you to our friends from Albania community. I never have been to Albania, but as I tried, I watched many Albania films. Because in the 1970s, the only foreign film we could see were from North Korea and Albania. Thank you, Rose, our generous donor. And thanks for friends who traveled from Maryland, Connecticut, and Long Island, and New Jersey. This is the final event of the season's World Poetry Salon. It is not the ending, but the beginning. Next year, we will welcome even more poets, musicians, artists to New York. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, especially because it's the end of the week and you are so exhausted. I hope you'll enjoy that. I'm going to read some parts, because it's a long poem, from the poem Water and Carbon, which is published in my poetry collection, Negative Space, by New Directions. I'll read only 2 parts in Albanian, and I will let you know which part, and then the rest is in English. Water and Carbon. First part. This is the English, this is the Albanian version, original. Zbulesa të bën një ditë shtatori, jo në një mal të thatë, por në kabinetin e kimisë. Në orën e fundit të mësimit, kur t'kish gorryer uria dhe kur pas monologut Hamletit dhe ekuacioneve me dy të panjohura, duke se s'mbetej më asgjë për të nxënë. Njeriu është veç ujë e karbon, shpalli ai. Dhe shkroi një formulë gjatë e gjithë vrima në tabel, si ka fasteli për lepujt. Ky është lajmësi, shëngjani, mësuesi i kimisë, me këmishë të djersitur nga vapa dhe rripin e pantallonave të mbërthyer në vrimën e tij të fundit. I qethur, i rruar taze, flokët i dystuar me vaj Figaro. A nuk duhet kishte të pak një pamje më të përvojtur? A nuk duhet kishte spaku një mjekër? As duhet spaku të merrte flak një shkurrë? Thjesht ujë dhe karbon, ndoshta dhe pak magnezium, azot, kalcium dhe fosfor, me një fjalë pak zgjedhje. Dhe i gjithë pushtetshëm, flaku shkumsi në një cep, si një çelës, që pas i shkullur dera nuk ka më arsye të përdoret. Dhe shkundi duart, misioni u krye, e fundit sapo u tha, tani shpërndauni dhe përcjellni lajmin e mirë, ose thefshi qafën pak rëndësika. Një lehtësim i hidhur në ajër, një aromë barje sapo prerë. Pa pritur s'dije më se kush ishim, pa pritur ishim gjithë të njëjtë. Atëherë qishta i shqetësimi përjetshëm në fytyrën e si me mëje, dhe për çdreq kombinimi kimik flisnin Adler, Schopenhaueri në kabinetin ngjitur, për të cilit andante vesh një mur i holl apo një jetë e tërë. English version. Revelation came to you on a September day, not on top of a barren mountain, but in the chemistry lab, during the last class period when you were starving, when after Hamlet's monologue and the equation with two unknowns, it became clear there was nothing more to learn. Human beings are simply made of water and carbon, he declared, and drew a long formula with many holes on the chalkboard that looked like a metal trap for rabbits. He was a messenger, St. John, the chemistry teacher, drenched in sweat, his belt buckled tight, face cleanly shaved, hair trimmed and parted flat with Figaro oil. Wasn't he supposed to look a little more miserable? Wasn't he supposed to have a long beard? Wasn't the bush nearby supposed to have burst into flames? Simply water and carbon, maybe even a little magnesium, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. In short, little choice involved. And he chucked the chalk into the air as if a key to a door without hinges. He clasped his hands. Mission accomplished. The last words already spoken. Now disperse and spread the good news, or go to hell, who cares? A bitter relief in the air, the scent of freshly cut grass. Suddenly, we no longer knew who we were. Suddenly, we are all the same. So why the eternal worry on my mother's face? And what sort of chemical compounds were Adler and Schopenhauer talking about in the other classroom, from which only a thin wall separated us? Or was it an entire existence? Part 3. Your body throws you under the bus. Your body betrays you. Your body is simply water and carbon. I was 17 one morning in my prison cell when, after a night of delirium, running a 107-degree fever caused by bronchopneumonia, I woke up and drenched in my own urine. I was neither a child nor a man anymore. Then in the labor camp out in the marsh, I saw the theologian gathering rotten bits of cigarettes, smelling the butts, trying to take a single drag. But when I saw the former Sorbonne professor secretly digging through a trash and pick up a piece of watermelon rind, which he then wiped on his pants and swallowed whole without chewing, I knew I witnessed 5,000 years of civilization extinguished in one moment. Of course, it's always the fault of the witness. the wrong eyes at the wrong place. Without a witness, we wouldn't even have crematoriums, and only white fumes would leak out of history's nostrils. Part 4. He had such a dignity. The old man who hung himself, rejected here on earth and now also in heaven. His bare feet like a saint's, his body a frozen planet revolving one last time around itself. His head drooped to one side as if he were refusing to witness even his own death. But it didn't end here. They plucked out his gold teeth, as if removing 3 generations of his history, declassed, disgraced, even among the dead. How can a toothless man protect himself at the last judgment? How could he formulate his arguments? The dead would laugh, angels would shake their heads. And so he too would be forgotten, simply water and carbon like everyone else. The living went back to work, eyes cast down as if it's their own funeral. The whips against their joints and back gave them no time to think much. You can't be last in line, this was the goal, morning to night. But where was our country at that moment? Where was Caesar? Part 7. I'm tired of listening to you enough now. Tell me just one thing. Why did you tolerate all this? Asks his brother from an ocean away, groomed by Hudson's breeze. He lives in a country where the right to pursue happiness is guaranteed by the Constitution. And what should we have done according to you? Some of you should have been killed so the rest could live with dignity. But this doesn't follow chemistry's laws. The sole mission of water and carbon is to stay alive at all costs. And to stay alive, they simply need their basic instincts, as basic as the words and phrases in the small pocket dictionary tourists carry in foreign lands. Like, for example, bread, water. How do you get to the nearest town? Do you have a vacant room for tonight? I can pay cash. Because of these instincts, some of us returned home alive with a pair of borrowed shoes. We built a hut of reeds and mud where we could begin again under a sky where a colorless porridge cooked in a pot with all the leftover seeds, like Noah porridge. We are guns without latches. We soften walls with our shadows. And we bore children, 2-dimensional children, like ribbons of light that enter through the crack of a door or through the torn tarp on a roof. Daydreaming children, the children of survival, who notice only the bony haunches of the farm oxen, and at night, like a secret sect, gathered around Dickens. Part 9. Children, yes, but adults never abandon their toys. Among tin bowls and aluminum spoons, coats and clogs of the same size, among the shaved heads, we were identified by our lost causes. One believed in the Republic, one in the monarchy, one in the revolution, one in truth, and one simply in health. A little too much faith there in 13 square feet of space. And the one who used to talk to himself or to a corner of the wall once got a little carried away when he claimed to be the Constantine the Great, mind separate from body. He was more akin to the Constantine Colossus with two right hands in the Palazzo dei Conservatori. You have no right to occupy two places in this world. Even in prison, there is no space for two selves. So one day they took him away, all of his pieces, to who knows where. Whichever piece ended up in the court and whichever in the Met House. And he was only 25 years old. Observed from above, we are simply part of a museum. Somewhere a mill wheel shone, somewhere a parchment yellowed, and somewhere else a horseman's costume hung without a horseman in sight. Part 11. Water has a short memory. From Palm Sunday to Good Friday, there were 5 blessed days. The one they are welcomed as triumphant into Jerusalem was nailed as faithless on the 5th day. But if we are only water and carbon, then what is love? How do we know it's love? You can't know, but others can. When they see you roofless, they think there was a fire there. At the camp, when mail arrived on Tuesdays, letters from wives, fiancés, lovers, one of us always ended up empty-handed. No letters for you, meaning she left you. In that moment, all eyes seized you and conjugated the verb to leave into all tenses, forms, persons, beyond etymologies, all the way to Salome and the dance of the 7 veils. Never before did you feel so naked that they could count the hairs and pores on your body, the nerves firing under your skin like frantic moles. They could easily make out your heart, a late tomato on the vine, unripe, green, so green you were stunned. From war and love, you return even more ignorant than when you first set out. Now this is the last part, which I'm going to read in Albanian first and then in English. Je I lirë, I thanë pas 45 vitesh. Ku do të shkosh? Ishe një lloj si të pyesësh të dënuarin me vdekje, çfarë këngë do? Ose më saktë, ai di çfarë ke humbur? Një dënim e dytë, një ekzekutim i dytë. Ishte fund qershori. Qielli hapte gojën cep më cep me një të qeshur pa cip, duke zbuluar një grumull rresh mbi majet e vetmuara. Ashtu si bileta shitësja të mbalte sajt pjekuris, kur ai tha, një bilet për në det të lutem. Udhimi që i gjatë, më i gjati që mund boj soji ynë prej ujit e karboni, në një vagon që mbante erë si mitet sa po dala nga furra dhe djers. Unë dal në stacionin e gabuar, pjesën tjetër të rrugës e bërim këmbë. Puhia e plepave godiste lehtë në zverk, si dhëndrin e ri që futet për herë të parë në dhomën e gjumit, pa e kuptuar nëse ishte përgëzues apo ngushëllues ai gjest. Dhe ja, deti. Si mundet t'ja fshehë njeriut një mrekulli të tillë? Si mund t'ja fshehësh ujit? Ku e kishte para ata anijet bardhë që I largoi portit, në cilën ëndër babai, gjyshi, asërgjyshi. Por rreth tij silleshin burra dhe gra me kostume laramane banjoje dhe fëmijë të hareshëm me supe përcëlluar. Vetëm ai në sezonin e gabuar, I vonuar, I parakoshëm. Vetëm ai I veshur me rroba dhe këpucë, si një piano I zezë, e mbyllur në një cep salle, rreth së cilës bota rrotullohet e patrazuar. Duke prekur me mallëngjim, ato miliarde e miliarde kokriza rëre, prej cilave Një e vetme do të përfundoj në barkun e një molusku, ku dhimbja do të shndroj në perl. English version. You are free, they told him after 45 years. Where will you go now? They could have been asking someone on death row, what song do you want to hear? Or more precisely, do you know what you have lost? A second punishment, a second execution. It was the end of June. The sky opened its mouth ear to ear and laughed brazenly, exposing a cluster of clouds above some lonely mountain peaks, and the ticket seller her wisdom teeth when he asked her, a ticket to the sea, please. The journey was long, the longest our kind of water and carbon could ever take, in a boxcar that smelt of freshly baked buns and sweat. He stopped at the wrong station, traveled the rest of the journey on foot. The breeze from the poplars blew softly against his neck. He felt like a newlywed entering the bedroom for the first time, not knowing if the gesture was meant to be congratulatory or congratulation or consoling. And here is the sea. How can men hide such a miracle from men? How can you hide water from water? Where had he seen that white ship leaving the dock before? In the dreams of the father, grandfather, great-grandfather? Around him circled men and women in speckled bathing suits and joyous children with sunburned shoulders. He was the only one in the wrong season, late, premature. He was the only fully clothed from head to toe, as if a black piano sat in the corner of a hall around which the world revolves undisturbed. He touched the sand. Only a single grain finds its way into the belly of an oyster, with time and pain to be transformed into a pearl. Thank you. Faleminderit.
Wow. Persodentia. Dachahao. Buonasera. Buenas noches. Thank you all for being here tonight. Those here in the room and streaming from afar. I am very honored to be back here at the Stavros Foundation and deeply honored to be with Luljeta tonight. For the last week, entering her work, I couldn't stop thinking about the great passions. People you meet, especially in your teens, in your 20s, 30s, they tend to happen. But they become sparse when you turn into your 40s and 50s. People, cities, languages, right? The great passions. And poets can enter your life as a great passion does. They do. They do. They do in your teens, in your 20s. I can still think, and I'm sure so many in the room remember the first time we read Vallejo, the first time we read Pizarnik, the first time we read Whitman, the first time we read Dickinson, Baudelaire, the first time some of us fortunate enough to read Frank Stanford. And this past week, I feel what many of you in the room have felt. As Wang said, quoting Eliot, who is here tonight with us. He said, Luljeta is the real thing. But he said this when she was in her early 30s. He said this about the first book that came out in 2002 with New Directions. And I thought, and I wrote to Luljeta, what would Eliot say if he read, your second book and your third book? And of course he did, and he's here tonight. I'm going to ask him because she is the real thing.
Perhaps he changed mind, on second, third.
There is, history without slogan. There is politic in her work, but without flags, without becoming explicit. There is all of this happening between kitchens and ships and prison cells, but also her village, poplars, people she met, she knew, and then others who she didn't, but who she read and gave voice to, as Frank Wilde. She is the real thing. And why? Because there's wildness of heart in this work. There's wildness of heart, and there is what is so hard, almost impossible. There's a voice in this work, and there's rawness, and there's no fear. And there's no fear to return to childhood more and more and again and again and again. So what I would like, Luljeta, to start with perhaps today is to talk a little bit about origins, but origins, of course, in the sense of what Edmond Jabès, the great French Egyptian writer, said, that a writer writes origins when he writes the moment. And reading Negative Space, especially the poem that gives title to the book, the poem opens in the late 60s, the Cultural Revolution, around the time you were born. It opens with puncture, rice bags, and mice. It is historical, but it's intimate. There's an arch going back, but also there's something luring there of the here and the now and the moment. So I wanted to start with that early confinement, what it did, how it shaped that idea of freedom, and what it did for you as a human being and, of course, as a poet in the page.
In my opinion, freedom is never a topic itself, because freedom is, we demonstrate freedom in the way we express ourselves and in our gestures and actions. I would say the same for love. But of course, almost in every poem you can find, the different shapes or aspects of freedom. Even in a love poem, or even in a, for example, probably the most dramatic poem of the Negative Space is Water and Carbon. But here you can find everything. So freedom, love, everything. So I could say that what I learned from the past is, since freedom itself, it's not a topic, is that I like very much an expression of George Orwell when he says that freedom is accepting that 2 + 2 make 4. So accepting the truth, the reality. So what I learned, and where I, let's say, demonstrated my freedom mostly in my life, is that in poetry, is the freedom of expression. For example, one of the poems, my early poems, is Wandering of Freedom, and the last, it's published, I think, when I was 27 or so, very young. So it was a disappointment about, all the expectations Albanian had. So it was, finally, I am freed from the illusion of freedom. Finally, I'm free. And probably, because your question connects, the history, my background, history of my country and freedom. There is another poem, published in Child of Nature, still from New Directions on 2010. And one of the stanzas is, so those who are born for survival will go on eating their offsprings without noticing the warming climate. So that's the post-totalitarian, Albanian reality that you can say even for 3 decades, the survival, you're the philosophy of survivors. So this, when you find, let's say, when you accept and feel free to express everything which in your opinion represent truth and reality. So that's the freedom.
And there was, and there is, and even throughout, not just, of course, your first book, Fresco, A Child of Nature, and Negative Space, the 3 of them with New Directions, I thought maybe in the second book, which I really adore, they're both, the 3 of them, so different. And in the third, so the reader will return with you to your village and to many of the voices that were important for you growing up. And of course, there is one of the important poems, I thought, if you could tell us a little bit about the Yellow Books. That, right, is a title for one of the poems and something very important for the history of the country and certainly for you as a poet.
Yeah, it's very significant to know about the history of my country. Of course, probably a big part of the audience here are Albanian. There is nothing new for them. But for foreigners, the history of Albania and what happened there, it's still kind of a mystery. One of the really very important preventions was the censorship of not only of literature, but also of, information. So it was so difficult and lately impossible to get access to Western literature. So it was, especially after 55, 50, after 60s, censorship was so powerful that even the classical Russian literature, which was very familiar in Albania, was banned. So the term yellow books, it was typical for Albania. Yellow, I think in America they mean Polizeisk thriller or something like that. But in Albania, were called the banned books, the books which circulated, secretly, because it was illegal. They were banned, and color yellow was because probably you have to hide them in the corners, and because of the dust or the dirt, I don't know why they were yellow. And in this way, I read some of my favorite books, before '91, of course, I read in this way. And I remember, just because they circulated in this way, they were also at the same time mystified. After 91, in public library in Albania, there was a pavilion called the Reservat, books which were only a few people who, let's say, kind of had the credibility from the regime, they were trusted, could have access in this pavilion. And I remember that the first I read in this way, translated from Russian, because the most of literature in this reservat was in Russian. So can you imagine, Soviet Union was much more liberal than Albania, because they were more open, to publications from, from abroad. And also some literature was, you couldn't find some literature in French or probably in Italian, I don't remember well.
But for almost 15 years, it was one of the most restricted, if not the most restricted country, right? In terms of having access, of course, no travel, books, publication.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So it used to be more liberal during the friendship with Soviet Union, but during the Khrushchev, period, and then during the friendship with China, which lasted almost 2 decades, from 60 to 78, until we are alienated, from them too. And the 80s were horrible in every sense possible. They were obscured and miserable, poverty and everything. So it was probably you can compare with North Korea now, exactly the same. But from cruelty, you can compare with Cambodia. So that's why we were reading books were food, especially in those conditions, was the only way to survive, because we didn't have, we couldn't use other sources for information. Television also was censored. And we only could get into the waves of, Rai Uno, Rai Due, Rai Tre,
Italian
television, with illegally
manufacturing
secretly,
antennas.
After midnight, mostly with manufacture some primitive improvised antennas. So after 91, the collapse of regime found us hungry. Hungry in every sense possible, but especially hungry for knowledge, for information. And it was exactly the time when the first post-totalitarian generation of writers, which I belong to, emerged.
So we have Luljeta in her mid-20s, and what is happening with the poets at the time in those early years of the 90s, right? There's hope, there's wreckage, right? But there's hope.
Yeah, it was, as I said, it's just it was very a lot of authors, it was a mess, A lot of authors were translated, but nobody cared about the quality of translation. We were hungry, as I said, we could eat everything, But at the same time, in one side, it was, we were exposed right away, to that, that ocean of information, which was a good thing. But on the other side, it was also shocking, because what you do, it's like you're going to a peluqueria, or tailor, and it's like you just came from a cave, and the guy gives you a catalog, of dresses and say, choose among them.
And you don't know what to do.
So the thing is that we embraced irrationally, everything, And our generation was very lucky, in one side, because we had what the previous generation didn't have. So they didn't have a considerable art education, because reading is an art education. It's not because the censorship worked only in publications, but it was everywhere, as I told you. So on the other side, there was a kind of chaos, in creativity. Subconsciously, everybody tried to run after their idols or the writers they just discovered. And it was very difficult to find this was a transit period. And of course, some of them survived to that, chaos and assimilation. Probably this is the right word, assimilation. And some of them, of course, they couldn't.
Because this brings for me the question of course, of, like you said, assimilation, but of influence, and that no freedom in a way, and I think the word protection, but so not having the possibility to have all those options in a way constrained, but allowed you to, and I want to talk a little bit about, of course, your work and some of the talismanic words or that objects that return in your work, gestures that you return in your work, words that return in your work. There's a moral attention, not moralizing, but care There's a care to attention to objects. And of course, nature, a lot of course, in A Child of Nature, but throughout even the early poems. So basically, I guess what I'm asking is, not having had that freedom to read anything you wanted, in a way also allowed you to, I'd love you to elaborate on this, you in your teens, basically daydreaming and developing your voice without being influenced by outside forces, outside literatures that could have come, of course, from all over, but they didn't. So I would love to hear maybe what was positive about that experience for you as a child and as a becoming writer.
So the first, we talk about objects, and then
yes.
So it's that design. I mean, of course, I think for that the way I write, the character of my poems, images, object as image to or details are very important. I think for a lot of poets, but I want to talk a little bit longer about a special relationship we had with objects, which the home, everything that designed our environment. And I mean, as you see, I always go back. It's so important, that thing. And I mean, living in Albania was, we never threw anything. It's, as you can imagine. You can call it poverty, you can call it minimalism, or whatever. So the thing is that we used, the number of objects we used were very limited. So probably most of the times we shared a comb, 2 or 3 persons. Everything was in common, used by everybody except toothbrush. And so that's why, because you couldn't replace them. I remember that probably you should, if you break the milk bottle, it's also difficult to replace it. The milk bottle we used, for every day. So that's why we developed it was like human beings. We pay so much attention to them. Being incapable to replace. One of them was because it were expensive, we couldn't afford. Another thing, because the market was very limited. Technology was, very unproductive, as you say, it's deficit. So there is a lack of very common products everywhere in market in Albania. So we treated the objects, and they became our companions. These objects lived longer than us. When I go back to the house in my hometown, and there are still some objects there, can you imagine? Most of our family are already, they passed away, but the objects are there because we developed that connection. They are like whole soul spirits, and the witnesses. So they have a history. They are not just objects, you see. So, and what poetry offers is that, poetry makes what, in my opinion, of course, because I'm declamating all the time, but it's like, for a poet, a piano is not just a piano. A spoon is not just a spoon. And so you always, that's the unlimited power of expression of objects in general, and because it's that vertical, it's the world seen from above. Poetry is never in use. Poetry happens before, is happening now, will happen in the future. So that's why every word it belongs now, it's now, and it's forever. It's the vertical, perception of reality. But in our case, in my case, and I would be happy if you could perceive some of objects, like, unique, and like, and carry, some of my history. So it's not just objects.
And what's also interesting, because of course you could have done what hearing you, for those who have not read you, they may think, if they know Felisberto Hernandez, the fiction writer from Uruguay, who personified his objects. And for instance, he had a balcony jump off the balcony and commit suicide, or the piano to listen to silence, and so on and so forth, all throughout his work. But we don't necessarily have that in your work. And what we certainly don't have with objects, what we certainly don't have is a sentimentality towards the objects whatsoever. And in fact, we have such a wide range, but at the same time, very, very raw, and amid both, I think of tools, I think of course, the radio, but I also, in A Child of Nature, when you give voice to some people in your family, it was this really lovely moment when your uncle talks about the fazzoletto.
Yeah,
right? And you use, of course, that in Italian. He brings that from Italy, and that sort of becomes, a talismanic moment between you two, the uncle and the niece, and in a way transports both the reader, but certainly you at the time.
So yes, because I didn't suppose. So yeah, I get it. I think it's just I'm always driven by. I mean, the way I write. It's my poetry is not confessional, and that's why I'm very slow, lazy poet. I write there because a confessional, a witnessing, a testimony poem for me is an unfinished poem. It's not finished. I remember one summer I went back to the hometown and to write because it was, and I mean the environment, everything is there, and it's a good place to work. And I remember my uncle. Of course, he doesn't have any. Probably he didn't read poems during his year, read books, of course, but so he didn't have any affection to poetry in general. But seeing me, it looks strange, staying close all the time in a room, So he said, "I'm writing, okay." But his question, I never forget it, and I think I have a line. It's a line in one of my poems. He asked me, "What do you say in your poem?" So he didn't say, "What do you write?" He said, "What do you say?" So in my case, I mean, witnessing, I mean, going back to the objects, telling what's my own story is not enough. I always ask what's behind that, what I mean, what do I want to say. So, and I like that you, in your opinion, I go beyond that. I ask for something that belongs to everybody, and doesn't stuck in my history, and can be read from everywhere, and something that involves the reader, inside. So everybody, through that poem, let's say, sees something that belongs to him. So what's the idea? So it's what I want to say with this. That's the thing that all this stuff that I employ, objects, and some of them, they look really sentimental, in my opinion. But what then? What's beyond then? What do you want to say? So they're always driving. I'm not saying that what I say is very important, but I tend to approach to the reader in that way.
Some moments I found myself writing, Caeiro, Pessoa's master, and what he, as the sensationist poet, for him, a stone was a stone, not this type of stone, or a tree was a tree, not, say, a poplar. In your poetry, and I say poplar because it's one of the trees that came up in the poem that you read, but we hear that tree, or we hear a village or a mountain, and we really could be in so many different places. We're not really in Albania, per se. Or the confinement is not necessarily 68 or the Cultural Revolution, and I think that it really succeeds the work, and with this comes a question. It really succeeds in not limiting the geography of the work, both neither in space nor in time. Do you think that partly the success that comes natural to you as a writer with work, but it feels natural, doesn't feel forced for us when we read your work, do you think that this goes back to I keep thinking about childhood and really the mystery of something in childhood. And that's why I said the wildness of the heart. And I just kept thinking, also reading your work, the Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, right? One of the piece of advice that he gives is stay true to that everydayness, right? That you witness as that you lived as a child. And if I'm not mistaken, Baudelaire says something about along those lines about genius is not more than childhood recapture at will.
Yes, childhood, but this is for everybody. No matter how, I think all childhoods are interesting, are unique, you can say. So it's like, and far we go, and more important and more preserved it comes. Which is another poem of mine. So you preserve it.
The further in time we go.
Exactly. If you create distance by that, which means time or space distance, more it's preserved inside you. So more you pretend you create distance for that, indeed, more present, it is inside you. So it's like a shell for a turtle that you are not aware. But when you start writing, the turtle is not aware about the shell. That's the same with the childhood, But and we go back and back always, which is not a question of sentimentalism. But we go back to the childhood each time we feel lost, in our life. It's like if you get lost in a forest, what you do if you get lost? You go back when you started and try to get another direction. So all these, kind of regress, kind of, spiritual, you go back and back and back each time. That getting lost you can interpret in different ways, which can be identity, emotional, whatever. But that's how these cycles repeat, in my creativity, at least. I'm not talking about poets. So it is there, and because also it's unique. But you think it's Albanian history and Albanian my childhood is. When I ask Americans, they think, oh, it's nothing interesting. But if you insist and they start telling you their stories, and if you go even beyond that, the grandparents, how they came, from Europe in different periods, and interesting. That becomes really very, very interesting in my eyes. So that's, I think that all childhood are unique, but the moment you go there, when you go there, that's a special moment. When you return to that, through your imagination.
So I think of course that I think of it as a treasure house, and I'll also certainly place and memories. But the DNA of the Albanian, of language, of the mother tongue. So in your case, the DNA of the Albanian language. So is there anything you would say that and now that you have been in the U.S. for a few years and you have come throughout the last 25 years to the U.S., that the Albanian language, for instance, in one of your poems, thanks to the translation, I learned that in Albanian, autumn is feminine. Mm-hmm. Right, so I became curious because in the languages that I know, autumn is masculine. It's masculine in German. It's masculine in most Romance, not all of the Romance languages. And I thought, so what about the other seasons? And what does that create something different for someone in that language? And of course, if you don't have a detachment from the language, it just it doesn't matter. But you have had, or I wanted to hear with maybe the detachment that you're beginning to have more and more, meaning that there is another language in your life now. Is Albanian doing, the DNA of Albanian doing something for you in that regard, in terms of expression or something unique to that?
Do you think, the question is that, does that the Albanian, language really makes an impact, the musicality or something like that in my poetry?
Something about the DNA that is Albanian, and I gave the example of autumn being feminine. And of course, for those authors who never leave that language and who are monolingual, they may not think about it. But you have had, of course, you've been with Italian growing up, and more often than not, and then of course now for the last 2 decades with English. So there is a sort of detachment for you to maybe not look at Albanian, of course, as a second language by no means, but to have a pause and to be able to. This is what Albanian does, and English doesn't do this. So.
So of course, but let's talk about the winter, because I was thinking about that. Of course, I mean, because Albania is a Mediterranean country, it's relatively warm. So 3 warm seasons are female, and winter is macho, because it's really,
winter is macho.
Logically, it makes sense. But we also use another word, which is a borrowed. For spring, we say bahar, which is Persian from origin, and we borrowed that from Turkish, I think, which is a neutral gender. So for me, I mean, I am not capable to judge how my poems sound in English. And what I would like to do is to write poems myself in English, which it seems it's impossible.
Do you think that's another question? So maybe the exophonic or heterophonic experience of writing in a language other than your mother tongue, is that something that you have tried, or would you try?
Albanian is a rich language, and some of the words have an onomatopoeic, composition. So probably you can create a decent idea about different natural phenomena, according to which I can say is kind of poetical, aspect of the language. Our grammar is less poetical than English, because it's similar to the Latin, which very long grammatical forms, and as you know, the English, the short grammatical forms make poetry sounding more.
So will we have Luljeta's
shorter
poems in English at some point? You think?
As in Italian, these grammar forms give to poetry. I'm talking in Albanian version, kind of ceremoniality. If you the same as you. Can hear my poems in Italian language. Lines are longer, words are longer, so you just then can interpret the effect of the sound. It's easier when you don't understand the language. You just you enjoy a blind, let's say,
the music, rhythms.
But about let's go back to. Of course, I would like who doesn't, and. Some Albanians do that. They write their works. I admire them in the language where they live, English, French, Italian. So the thing is, I always had problems with foreign languages. I mean, because I have a logical, I'm a logical thinker. So languages are arbitrary, you take it, they don't need a logical to memorize them. So I always had problems, and with memorizing, I don't know anything by heart, when the logic that is not involved included. But when you are a child, it's or young, it's easier anyway, to learn new languages. But in my age, or even a bit earlier or younger, I mean, language is a logical system which already, formed. So when I was ready to or I wanted, to write my poems in English, it was too late, because it's I think in Albanian syntax, whatever, it's not about the lexic. So it's not about how many words, it's a way of thinking the language. And the language, is not so flexible So it's not that you can give your thoughts any shape you want, so it's already shaped. It can get, it's like, it's not that you can, I need time.
This is a topic very dear to me, and we will talk about, of course.
You can't change me as a person. It goes, partly with your personality.
Right, of course.
Exactly.
Of course.
So, good, bad, with everything I have,
personality to each language.
Exactly. The same with language. So, the language is a system already installed, inside me. And I have difficulty to express it, in that way that I would do if I would say that I would learn English when I was younger, living here, and also the vivid language. You should. That whatever I do, it's like I can't write the vivid English, the language of the street. It's like the being it's another thing.
It's another thing. But before,
because it depends on the environment, the experience you have in a country, with whom you live.
With whom you live, of course. We only have 2 minutes, and of course I have so many questions, but I'll put 2, and you can only answer 1. I would love, of course, to hear about Homo Antarcticus. Is just such a poem unlike anything I've read. It's a negative space. It's you give voice to Frank Wilde, and of course I thought of Browning and the dramatic monologues. So that would be a question: how did you come to Frank Wilde, and how and the process of that poem quickly? We really don't have that much time. Or if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with images and cinema. Tarkovsky, Bertolucci, Hitchcock, Tornatore.
Homo Antarcticus better.
Homo Antarcticus. All right. All right.
Yeah. So one of your questions was about the facts, the testimony and history, the facts, and the personal experiences. So, but with this poem, indeed, which was probably the biggest risk I took as a poet, was that I choose to write about a documentary, a history which is so well known,
So
widespread.
Frank Wilde, British explorer.
It's a fact. It's a document. So, and nothing. Everybody knew it. Nothing was left, to say about the story. So, but what really impressed me about that was not the survival for 2 years of the equipage of the
crew.
Yeah, crew. Mm-hmm. Yes, in
Antarctica,
the Antarctica. So in nowhere, which then was turned into a saving mission from a scientific mission from Shackleton. Then the only mission of him was how to bring back safe these 23 or 25 men back home. So, and then there where he shined as a leadership, and he studied everywhere, as a model of leader, what he did really. But okay, nothing to say about that. So what really impressed me and encouraged me to think and to write this poem was a turning point. So when they came back home, those men who survived, the impossible, in every sense possible, which is they survived the cold, the hunger, the anxiety, the hopelessness. When they came back home, they couldn't survive their normal life. So, and they had they kind of were walking dead after that. They were not capable living as normal people. Some of them, and they returned back once, twice. Shackleton himself twice, until he died there.
Right.
So the question, the idea we're talking about was the idea. What I wanted to say with that is the question, how that is possible, that what our modern civilization is taking from us, is giving or taking more from us. So what's wrong with that? Because we saw the other extreme, those men living alone in middle air, so only against that powerful, nature no, the natural powers, and they survived, But here, the simple things, paying the rent, paying the bank loans, getting married, making a family, which are normal stuff, every day. They couldn't survive
But
that.
in a way, of course, and this is what's extraordinary and so powerful, I should say, in your work. And again, this poem is so different from everything else and so unexpected, is that you are dealing with what happens when we return. And of course, we find it early in your book, in your books, and those who were in confinement and then found themselves with freedom. So what happens when we return to a so-called exactly. So in a way, it becomes another way to explore the human condition and exactly.
But the why I chose Frank White to, just as the lyrical voice, and because of course it was tactical at first, because we know a lot about Shackleton, but Frank White was kind of the man,
the right hand side, right? The right
in
hand
shadow, let's say, or the forgotten man. So I was more free to tell the story through him, and also because Frank Wilde is there, symbolizes the friendship. So this guy had ambitions too, but for him was more important to be the loyal, the right hand of Shackleton, than his own ambitions. Because in our times, these are some values that are getting dismissed. Friendship, friendship. And another thing is that he kind of, I never say that before, reminded me my uncle, who had epical, I can say, life. He was executed on 47. He was one of the guys of the anti-communist resistance. They were in kind of working fight in guerrilla groups. And he lived illegally with his unit or something like that. But he was very brave man, and he was speechless. He didn't, but he was a man of action and very enigmatic at the same time, and had all the quality, even the body and the face and the portrait of Frank White is the very first time I say that. It reminds me of my uncle. And he was very interesting. He was executed. He was caught, betrayed by, that's the story, betrayed by the last man he trusted on, his friendship, his childhood friend. So that was his end. So they're all, when you decide, you are not clear yourself, but gradually you say that what intrigues me about, this portrait and this man, and I read all the diaries indeed. So there is not a lot spoken, written about Frank White, but if they give you a few elements, so you have more space for your own imagination to create him by your own self. So most of the elements there are invented by me, imagined. There are only a few elements that I have to cook,
You just, I think what that poem ends up doing is really takes farther what you had already been doing, just takes it really farther, of course, taking someone outside of your culture, outside of your century, and in a way, through hardship, and this is something that, of course, thanks to not falling into or following confessionalism, we end up reading a poetry that, unlike so many poets or so-called poets in the 21st century that whine, that cry their hardships, you celebrate. I read in your poem, not celebration, of course, of sadness and of the great and the terrible horror, but that celebrates because it believes in human beings, in the humankind, and so there's hope. It's a poetry of hope, and of course I keep coming back to what I said at the beginning of and the word stubborn, but in a good way, of stubborn freedom. in your work. And with
because
this,
it's directly connected to water and carbon. Probably is the most representative about what we are talking. I mean, so this is the only somehow direct poem about, would say political poem, about communist regime. And this is the only poem where I really am playful grammatically and, moving from first voice to the second voice, first voice in plural, so which is intentional to expand, dimension of the story. But I mean, why I kept so long writing when, I mean, the communism was in my bones. So why I didn't write something so direct with that dimension before? Because I was waiting for a way to approach it. Because, I mean, nobody can be impressed anymore about sufferings of this nature after Holocaust, wars or something like that. And even communism was popular in Europe and America through authors like Solzhenitsyn and Pasternak, and many other or Eastern Europe poets. So I just needed an original, viewpoint, which was if you take away those elements which make the identity of human being, as communism did, they took away, the private property, they take away the political freedom, they take away the freedom of speech, they take away the religion. So if you take away all these elements, that make the identity of a person and the people, talking about Albania, so what remains and what is left is just that chemistry, the biological, the materia, which is, as all human beings are composed by 90% carbon, water and carbon and some other elements. So that's why it's called water and carbon.
Luljeta, grazie di cuore, grazie di cuore, grazie Nava. Thank you everyone for staying, for coming. Those live streaming, those here, and there's more next year. We're going to have, as Juan said, more readings, more musicians. So please stay tuned. And thank you again, the Stavros Foundation, Juan Ying, and everyone here tonight. Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you,
Grazie.
Patricio. Thank you.